Good evening and welcome to the Kansas Legislature live here at Smoky Hills Public Television Station in Bunker Hill. I'm your host, Becky Kaiser. I am a reporter with Hays Post Eagle Radio News in Hays and also a fellow at the Docking Institute at Port Hays State University. And we are excited to have two of our legislators here this evening who we get to talk to fairly regularly, and we appreciate them being with us this evening. Closest to me is Ken Rahjes, who of course is from Agra, and he is a Republican in the District of 110, and then also Representative Troy Waymaster, a familiar face around this area from District 109 and Bunker Hill. Let's get right to it, but first we always want to review, Troy, and we'll start with you to remind everybody what it is that you do in the legislature, committees that you're on, and then we'll talk about what has happened recently.
Well, I can do that, Becky, and thank you for having me here this evening. Representative Troy Waymaster from the 109th Kansas House District. I represent the entire counties of Russell, Osborne, Smith, Lincoln, and Ellsworth County. That is what changed in the redistricting of 2022. In the legislature, I serve on the House Appropriations Committee as the chairman. And I've been doing that for 8 years now, which is, we had my intern after Kevin Yoder, who was a chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. He and I were talking about getting a list and compiling that of all the chairmen of House Appropriations. And after my intern worked on that, I'm the longest serving chairman of appropriations in Kansas history.
Oh, really?
Well,
congratulations.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
The former speaker always says that when he introduces me to people, but I always thought Ron was joking. But actually, he was being truthful. I am.
So you know it all now. You
no, there's every year is different. Things come at you that you didn't even think were being thought of. So no, I don't know everything, but I'm well prepared. I also serve on the State Finance Council. That's a position that I have because I'm chair of appropriations, which is actually headed by the governor. And then during the interim, which we'll be entering into probably shortly in the beginning of May, I'll be serving on a lot of interim committees, but those are yet to be named.
All right, and Representative Rahjes, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm not near as exciting as that. So I live outside the community of Agra in Phillips County, so I represent Phillips, Rooks, Graham, Norton, and rural Ellis counties. So not Hays and Victoria, but pretty much everything else there. I serve as chairman of the Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee, Higher Education Budget, and as well as Appropriations. So I'm within throwing distance of Chairman Waymaster if I get out of line. And then also serve as on the Claims Against the State Committee, which is one of those that you learn a lot about folks and those that have exhausted all the resources to try to get some relief from things that maybe the state could or maybe should be responsible for. So we meet a few times after the legislature up till session as well. So that has been an interesting kind of out of my comfort zone a bit, but it's always good to know more functions of the government.
Well, as probably everybody knows, you are in adjournment now and
Yes.
looking at a little bit of time off, although I know you're both very busy. I'm sure all the legislators are. In fact, Representative Rahjes, you'll be in Hays tomorrow with Senator Bellinger from Goodland to talk to the Hays during the Hays Chamber event with other people to talk to them about what's been going on. You were supposed to do that a week ago Saturday, but it was postponed because legislators were deep into the night, Friday night, Saturday morning, talking about the budget, talking about tax relief, and I'm a little bit confused about what actually happened. So I guess, Troy, we'll start with you and give us the rundown.
Well, I mean, we started that morning at 10 a.m. on Friday and ended everything about 3 a.m. Saturday morning. And what it really came down to was trying to find some type of tax policy that both chambers could agree upon. During the week, the House had a position. The Senate didn't like that, so they kind of derailed that particular tax bill by calling it materially altered and sent it back to committee. And then they came with their own tax plan. Now, this one, ironically enough, the governor was advocating for. And so she was kind of working with the Senate and talking with the Democrats and gaining their support for this particular tax bill. We went back, we caucused for what, an hour and a half on the tax bill. and then went it back into the House chambers, and then we sent it back to conference committee. And so they had to go and work on a new tax bill, and then late or early Saturday morning, we finally had a 2-bracket system, condensing that from the 3-bracket system that we currently have. The lower rate being 5015, the upper rate being 555. 555, that's, I got it right. And then there were other, modifications as far as exempting Social Security income up to $100,000, property tax exemption, moving that from 43 to 100,000. A lot of the things that the governor had put in there, aside from what we had been advocating for on the House side, which was a single rate. Also, many of are referring that to as a flat tax, which the governor had vetoed, and we were unable to override her veto. So then we went to a 2-bracket system. That's what the Senate then derailed. And then when they went back after we sent the Senate bill back to conference, we came back with the 2-bracket system. As far as the fate of it, we don't know. There's been reports, and there's also been, quotes from the governor that this is more costly than she's been looking at. And I would say the first year, it's a little bit more costly for me too. It's about $634 million on the front year, and then, but in the outlying years, it is considerably less than what it would have been with the other tax bills that we had. So it's not going to have that much of an impact on the budget in 26, 27, and 28, but in fiscal year 25, it'll have a huge impact because you're immediately getting rid of the income on the Social Security. You're eliminating the food sales tax as far as the state imposes on July 1. So there's a lot of upfront costs that will be affecting fiscal year 2025.
What allows us to make those changes? Are we still talking about plenty of money in our budget?
We are. When I carried the budget Friday afternoon, that was after we didn't know exactly what was going to happen with the tax bill. I mean, so if you take the tax bill out of the equation, the state of Kansas was sitting with a $2.5 billion ending balance in fiscal year 2025. And when I made my closing remarks when I was carrying the budget, I said, we need tax relief for the people of Kansas. The state should not be sitting with this type of reserves in our coffers.
Ken, I know you've said that that's, as you have gone around and talked to constituents throughout this legislative session, that's pretty much been the number one concern people have had is tax relief.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and it's frustrating. I was at one of the meetings this week where we had a chance to talk, and we didn't do enough. I mean, it's 165 different ideas with House and Senate members, but I guess a compromise, which sometimes you have to do that to get the votes, but we were looking at some sort of property tax relief and to take a couple meals off what the state had for schools and settle for a half. I mean, it's is that really relief? People, this is what people do. People get excited about their income tax from a federal level. From a state, most people don't. I had somebody this week say, "Oh, wow, you're going to save me $50." And so people, so people say, "Where's my property tax relief? Where is that at?" And so we can talk and we can slap ourselves in the back about how great this thing is. There are some great things in there, Social Security and other type things that we need to hopefully get us an advantage to take those taxes off. But and again, I'm not a tax committee anymore, so I mean, I'm just a sideline observer. But I wish there were some things we could do more. But quite honestly, as the session wore on and as the tax debate really got in, the House and Senate were on completely different planets, not even on different sides of the room or the building. We were on different planets, and it was a who can puff their chest out the largest. And really, I don't think either side was really looking what's truly best for Kansans. We were looking at what could possibly gain us votes, which again, I understand that's important, but did we really do the best plan we could? And I think the details are going to find out. And we don't know what the governor's going to do. We know today she used a lot of red ink.
We'll be talking about some of that.
And so it would seem from a political standpoint, why would she sign the tax bill? We come back, She can call a special session, and all of a sudden, look who's didn't, quote, do their job. And that's what's so frustrating. But it's not that we didn't try, Becky. I mean, one of the first bills we passed this year was a tax bill early on. And so it's not like nothing's been done till the end, as in years past, but it's frustrating when there's that much money, when the federal government and folks have spent a lot of things online. And that's one of the reasons why our revenues are high. But still, we have done a good job of planning for a rainy day. We've done a good job of ending balance to be within that percentage we need to be. That then should go back to the people. That should go back to the people because, and a lot of people say, well, start this program, that program. Well, those aren't long-term sustainable because we know so far we've been lucky. We haven't had that big downturn in the economy. But K-State just came out this week and said the farm economy is going to have some challenges in 2024. And so that's going to have ramifications, especially out here.
I hadn't heard that yet. What are they concerned about, K-State, with the farm economy?
Well, I think what's going to happen is the commodity prices are going to be a little bit lower. Who knows what this weather's going to be if it turns off dry again. That's going to be one of the biggest things. Input costs, while some have gone down, others have not. And so that's the whole situation where, and we can go into a national scenario, but there's a lot of different things that could do that. And the biggest thing, as we saw what happened at the end of the week in the markets and the outside of the grain commodities and livestock commodities, is the consumer price index and where we are with inflation. Inflation is there. You can't ignore it. And so that has, I talked to folks today of how does that impact all of us, especially those of us in agriculture, as the long-term and higher interest rates, folks need to borrow money for operating loans and so on. So, I want to be cautiously optimistic, but more importantly, I want to be realistic.
Absolutely. And we are still waiting on a national farm bill, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That has not happened yet.
Chairman of the House Ag Committee says May now. He is the most optimistic member of Congress I have ever seen, but I will believe it when we see it. There's so much dysfunction in D.C., and we don't want to make sure that doesn't get to Topeka.
We want to remind you that you're part of this program too, so give us a call if you have a comment or a question of our legislators this evening. That number to call, 1-800-337-4788, of course, is toll free. I have a question of clarification because I'm not sure, I don't quite understand it. We talk about the removal of taxes on Social Security. What are those taxes? And I have had a friend, I'm not quite there yet, but a friend is, and he swears up and down his Social Security is not taxed by Kansas. So what are we talking about?
The provision that's in the tax bill, and it's what was introduced by the governor, it was in all the tax bills that we had, is that if your combined income with Social Security and the other income that you might be coming in, right now it's exempt at $75,000, and we raised that to $100,000. So you're exempt from the income tax on, according to this tax bill, on the first $100,000 of your income, combined income. No, so not just Social Security, it's also all your income, and you're exempt from that. And we raised the bar from $75,000 to $100,000, and so that's the provision that's in the tax bill. So if he's making less than $75,000,
right,
he's already exempt. This is just raising it to help more Kansans that's drawing Social Security, who might be having income that is up to $100,000.
We had issue of those that were receiving Social Security, other benefits, maybe a pension, retirement fund, and that was kicking them maybe to $75,001, and that completely changes the game. And so
they were taxed on
right. They were taxed on the whole thing then. So what we needed to do is based on the numbers and based on a lot of conversations that 100,000 now will be the next kind of threshold to be at, and that's why. So yes, but if they are under that 75,000 mark, they probably have not been taxed.
And I want to go back to something that Representative Rahjes mentioned in regards to property taxes, because that's something that's been resonating this entire session and even last session, where constituents and residents of Kansas are upset about the property taxes. And so the state can do very little in regards to property taxes. That's more on the local level. But what we can do is monitor and manage the 20 mills that we pay for education. And that's where he was talking about, our first position was reducing that by 2 mills, so instead of 20, it'd be 18. And then I have to admit, I'm very much like Representative Rahjes, I wasn't very happy with the compromise that was made where it was just 0.5%. So it went from 20 to 19.5. And so really it didn't generate as much property tax relief as we wanted in the beginning. It's some, but it's not a lot.
You mentioned education. Where do we stand on funding for that? Special education was a hot topic this session.
Very hot topic. It's been a hot topic for probably the last 2 legislative sessions. And so what the chairperson of the K through 12 Education Budget Committee has been trying to do is trying to adhere in a way to the 92% that the state is required to statutorily to fund special education. And so there's been mechanisms that has been used in funding special education. So you might be using the local option budget, you might be using other forms within the school board. And she was trying to use those dollars to account for the 92%. The other big piece of special education is the federal government has not put in their money and their dollars to account for that 92%. So now they're asking the state to put up the amount that the federal government's not putting up to meet the statutory requirement of 92%. The state is saying, no, we want the federal government to be a partner as well. And so that's where we're coming into this impasse in regards to special education. As far as the education bill itself, we barely passed it out of the House. It went to the Senate and failed. So when we go back to veto session on April 26th, they're going to be going back to conference committee between the House and the Senate and trying to generate some type of new education financing bill.
I believe there is a compromise that is almost agreed to. So some of the things that were in there that many of us didn't like are taken out or given some more time. Special education dollars, and of course that's a big deal. That'll be a big deal tomorrow as well. And we want to get there. My concern is with a huge influx of dollars, while that's great, we can't do that every year. The bill had for 1 year, put this money in. My concern is the pipeline's not full of new special education teachers and those that can help. They said, well, pay more those that are there now. Don't disagree with that. But where are we going to be to a point where do Kansans want 90% of their budget to go to K-12 education? Maybe they do. I don't know. Now that may be a bit of a stretch. I know, don't have the phones ring. But my point is that we need to, we know Fort Hays and other places are doing great to grow special education teachers, other folks that can help in special education, and then we want to make sure, I was looking more at a long-term commitment, maybe not quite as much money as say 75 million, maybe less, but we could show you the state is committed for a number of years that we can work together. But again, the onus goes back on the federal government, and that's what happens. I mean, the feds put in requirements but don't fund it, then it goes to us, well then we don't, then it goes back down to the counties or the school boards, and so it's this never-ending battle that we have. But the traditional K-12 funding isn't full funding, is constitutional funded. The court decided to drop kind of their overseeing, if you will, of K-12 finance. So the legislature is doing their job. Some folks got really nervous about that, say, well, cuts are coming. There was a lot of rhetoric from outside the Capitol this session that really were trying to stir the pot and say, oh, no, that's going to be horrible. Well, I think almost all of our legislators truly do want students in Kansas to have a good education. And we have stayed with that. There's not been, if there's been an effort to cut the constitutional funding for K-12, it didn't go very far. Now, I don't serve in that committee, so I kind of stay a little bit off of that just because there's so much rhetoric. I talked to a few of my superintendents, and because if I'm not going to call them and start spreading rumors about stuff that I know is not going to go anywhere. We are struggling here to keep to keep those students learning, to keep teachers, keep administrators, to keep folks in these communities. And so that's one thing that we're going to continue to fight for. I have many small 1A schools. And so it's almost like David versus Goliath. I talk about all my schools together. That's not even one in Blue Valley or Shawnee Mission. All the students together. So that's where, you know, we're going to fight. We're not going to give up. But sometimes there's a lot of discussions that have to go in. You dig your heels in, you're going to get mowed over. So you have to be able, though, to be able to have those conversations and to be willing to engage rather than just say, well, here's what if we don't get this, we're going to fold our hands up and until, you know, and hold our breath and hopefully it works. Well, it doesn't work that way. So we're going to still work on it. We'll know more when we get back, but I think
Right.
I think we're going to be close to something that they say something I might like. So I don't know if you know my record on I support small schools, and so some of the other ones maybe don't agree with me and create some other illusion. But if it's good for our small schools, then it is something that should be supported.
Going back to the Kansas Supreme Court kind of relenting in regards to the constitutionality of education funding, that did happen earlier this year. Mm-hmm. And yeah, there was some concerns that we would be cutting. Well, why would we cut? When we have, as I mentioned before, you know, a $2.7 billion ending balance in 2024, and even with changes made in 2025, regardless of a tax plan, we have an ending balance of $2.5 billion. So I think that was just a lot of comments that be thrown out there because the Supreme Court did not have to adhere to what we were doing anymore. People were getting nervous, but there was no reason to cut because we have it set in statute and we set up the finance formula. And that's the reason why in 2017, the then Speaker of the House extracted the K through 12 education budget out of the main budget. When you talk about the main budget for the state of Kansas, that's more than half of the Kansas state budget. $6 billion is going through K through 12 education. And in fiscal year 2025, they're getting an additional increase of $192 million. And then on top of that, in fiscal year 2026, it's estimated to be $208 million because of the formula that we have set up. So the notion that we were going to be cutting schools was a false one that was going out there. Because one, we have the dollars in the coffers, and two, we have a finance formula that was adhered to by the Kansas State Supreme Court, and that's the reason why they were relented on overseeing education finance, because we did have this plan in place.
We were speaking of education. I wanted to ask, has the state done anything or would like to do anything regarding the decline of the number of teachers that we have? It's a profession that doesn't get a lot of respect, apparently. There have been surveys about that recently, and we really need, there's a great big hole, more than I realized, such a shortage. Can the state do anything about that?
Wasn't there a report that Kansas is the second leading state in teachers exiting the
Yes, I believe that's what it was.
the profession? And unlike some other states where they actually set teacher pay, the state of Kansas does not. We administer the funds down to the local school boards, and then they decide how much they're going to be paying their instructors. So that is actually done at a local level. The state really doesn't have any control. I mean, we could step in and say you're going to be paying your faculty this amount, but I don't think that's a step that the state wants to take. I mean, there's a whole host of reasons. Societal, there's other, impacts in regards to maybe why you're leaving the profession. But I think pay is the biggest, and that's something that has to be addressed at the local school board level.
All righty. Next question I wanted to ask you, we were talking about tax relief and talking about the tax plan for the state. I find it a little bit confusing. Explain to me the difference between the tax plan and the budget itself. And you were commenting earlier, Troy, that you've got some of your budget paperwork right in front of you that you can
I do, yeah.
taking
I
care
kind
of.
of live with these things all session, actually all year long. They intertwine together. because the revenues that we receive, as far as what the tax receipts are for the state of Kansas, then substantiates and stipulates what the spending levels are going to be for the state of Kansas. Now, coming out of the pandemic, there were a lot of anomalies that we didn't know was exactly going to happen. So we were very cautious as far as our spending. There were also some programs that were then funded by the federal government. I'll say, especially in regards to health, the federal government said, you know what, states, we're going to come in and we're going to help you for a time being. So that was a cost savings that the state was not having to pay. And so we were very cautious on looking at, because we knew it was going to end, and sure enough, it did. And it's going to be ending, actually it ended in fiscal year 2023, or calendar year 2023, right, as far as the enhanced FMAP. And so those were savings that we had for 2-3 years. And so we were very cognizant that those were savings for a short period of time and that we could not spend that. Now, other states didn't follow the path that Kansas did. And they're actually getting into trouble because they spent those savings, and now that the federal government is pulling back on these programs, they have to pay the cost, and they don't have the funds to do it. And so I'm very glad the state of Kansas was very financially aware of what was going to be happening. So in regards to tax, I don't know how many conversations Chairman Adam Smith and I had over the last 2 years on, what can the budget sustain? We don't want to go back to the tax plan of 2012. That completely broke. I mean, that's when I came into the legislature. So, and Ken, you came in, 2 years later?
Right.
I mean, so we lived through that particular dilemma. We don't want to go back to that. But we want to give tax relief to the Kansans. So what is sustainable? What can we have in outlying years we don't have to, we can have this, as far as the budget items, constant. We can have tax relief constant. And that is where you try to mirror the two together. And so he and I, Adam Smith and I have been talking nonstop, and I said, Adam, this is the most that we can afford as far as a tax plan. And he kept every tax plan within that window. I do have to say, this, like I mentioned before, with the front year of 2025, it is a little bit higher than I would like. But the outlying years is actually below the window or the amount that I gave Adam. So yeah, it might be a little costly up front, but in the outlying years, it should be sustainable.
Don't lose sight of the fact it's an election year. Why it's more in this coming one. I mean, let's just be honest.
For everyone.
Sure. I mean,
Yeah,
so
has in it.
so that's it. Simple. I mean, a simple way to look at it is like this, Becky. The budget is what you want to spend. So the tax is how you gonna pay for it. So you do one or the other. It's pretty much, the way I see it, it's pretty much that simple. And so who in a sense, who's going to win, who's going to drive the bus, and so that's what's happened. I do want to step back just a little bit and talk about teachers. Most of the universities had a plan that wanted to continue to expand some of the programs on teaching. For whatever reason, it didn't make the final cut, in a sense, when we went through higher education. But I know that all the institutions are doubling down their efforts as best they can with probably limited resources to encourage folks to be teachers. And specifically, in kind of in our area, and if you take the western part of the state, is we need folks to come back home. We need folks to come back home. They had a good experience, hopefully, growing up, and that they want to come back and they can have a good life. And we need teachers not only to teach the STEM classes, music, the arts, those type of things. They're pretty good jobs. The base salary is not bad, and so we'll continue those efforts. We'll continue. We yet again we made a lot of good investments, and I don't want to go off too deep, but we made a lot of good investments yet again in higher ed, and Fort Hays did very well. And healthcare and nursing was a big one, especially for Fort Hays and others. And so, I'm always good for, supportive making good investments, but I'm also very supportive of giving the money back to the people. It's not our money to keep and look at and say, my, those shiny coins are nice. It should go back to the people. It's their money.
Going back to the question on taxes, we will see a lot what happens on April 20th or around that time when the Consensus Revenue Estimate Group meets. And they will reevaluate the tax receipts for the state of Kansas. And that could also impact the decision by the governor on what to do about the tax plan. Because if they lower the tax receipts, it's not going to be as much income coming into the state of Kansas, and so adjustments will probably have to be made.
Is that a regular thing that is
That
done every
happens
year?
in April and November.
Oh, twice a year.
Twice a year. And and it's economists, it's universities, people in private business that all meet, and then they just kind of speculate what the receipts are going to be for the state of Kansas, an array of areas. I mean, that's not just income, sales, and commercial. I mean, it's compensating use, like Representative Rahjes was talking about with the Wayfair decision, how that impacted the tax.
Agriculture, the whole thing.
Yeah, oil, gas, liquor, cigarettes. I mean, they talk about everything that is taxed in the state of Kansas, and they project where it'll be from April until November, and then in November, after the election, they'll look at it again, and then they'll make their revisions. So that'll be happening this month.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
That'll be right before, well, you'll be part of that, or you'll be back in Topeka then before the
We will be
26th,
back
and-
on the 25th.
Okay.
House Appropriations and Senate Ways and Means will actually come back a day early, and we will actually have a briefing from the Consensus Revenue Estimate Group on what changes were made in regards to tax receipts. And then we will kind of break off. That'll be a joint meeting, and then we'll break off, and then we'll talk about items that we discussed during the budget process, but we said, you know what, I think we need information or we need to hold off. So let's, and this is the legislative term, let's kick it to omnibus. And so we'll be talking about those items, and then also if the governor submits any governor's budget adjustments that she wants to make to the budget as well.
We'll see what happens then. We do have a phone call now. On the line is Kathy from Dodge City. Kathy, your question or comment of the legislators this evening?
Yes, thank you. I live in Dodge City, and we do have a diverse population here, predominantly Hispanic. And my question for the legislators is, in our school system, we do have predominantly English-speaking teachers in our school system, but we also have to have, oftentimes, Spanish-speaking para who assist the primary teacher because of incoming immigrants who are not perhaps fluent in our language. How does that affect our Kansas budget, or does it? Do they allow extra funds for that? Do we pay extra taxes for that? Or how is that paid for? That's my question.
You want to do it?
Well, to be quite honest, there is a very, very small provision in education finance in regards to faculty that is bilingual. Again, that is basically education finance is based off of base aid per pupil, and so that's funneled down to the school districts, and then depending on what the student makeup is of their population, and if they do have to have faculty or teaching staff that needs to speak English and Spanish, and also in Garden City and Dodge City, it's beyond just English and Spanish. Mm-hmm. I mean, you also have other languages because of the economy at scale down there. And so you have to, not only just bilingual, it's trilingual or quadlingual. I mean, you have to find those individuals, whereas, say, in the school districts, in my district, you're probably not going to have that great of a need. But there is a small provision, but it's probably not addressing the need that Kathy was actually questioning about.
Probably the local option budget money might go to that, but yeah, I know that, especially Garden City is especially, I don't know, 16, 18 different dialects that they have to deal with and try to find those. It has been a big challenge, but the fights are starts with kind of the per pupil, and then waiting
At-risk
WEI
ratings and
all those type of situations.
The next topic I wanted to touch base on, another hot topic that we've been talking about for a while, is potential expansion of Medicaid. And as I'm sure both you gentlemen know, Governor Kelly was in Hayes and touring Hayes Med yesterday, talking to the faculty and staff and doctors there, and she obviously is a proponent of it. We actually had a debate on it for the first time in, I think, 4 years, but it really didn't go anywhere. So what's going to happen?
Well, it wasn't a debate. It was the committee,
Had a hearing.
and House
A hearing.
had a hearing, and so where's it going? I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I mean, the governor spent an awful lot of fuel jetting to Hayes and back. I saw in a news report that the Ellis County representatives were invited yesterday. I looked long and hard to find my invitation. I feel bad, but on our break, we plan
Weeks in advance.
weeks in advance, even for the 2.5 weeks we're home. So, but I didn't find it. But regardless of the point, there was that yesterday, and I have no problem with the governor doing whatever she wants to do. She's made that a big push, and so on. She's not been in my office. She's not called me on the phone and say, Ken, what's it going to take? We had a discussion last night in Plainville in Rooks County, and it was about 120 maybe people there, kind of all sides. It was slanted. The speaker, Dan Hawkins, Speaker of the House, was there. He is a opponent of Medicaid expansion, and others were there and made their voices known. And it was not necessarily a debate per se, but I just don't think it's going to be moving. I know that when the Senate left, Minority Leader Sykes had a motion they will consider when they come back to possibly pull that bill above the line, and then to have a debate on the Senate floor and then have a vote. I don't know if the votes will be there. I doubt it to pull it up, but because the Senate works a little bit different than the House, and I'm not sure all the dynamics of that. But that's kind of where it is. One of the challenges I see, Becky, in this whole conversation of Medicaid expansion is that it stifled a lot of discussion of health. And folks that have been in any of the town halls that when we talk about this subject, I get frustrated because when we talk about health, and this is the first thing that comes up, and we talk this way, or we talk over each other, we don't really have a conversation. We can almost yell at each other. Those that are for it and those that are against it, and so we don't move forward. And then everybody is upset and then moves forward or doesn't move forward because we're all upset at each other, rather than have a true conversation of what are we going to do to deliver health care to Kansans. One of the things we've done, it's in the budget, and one thing the House really led the charge on was to increase reimbursements back to our hospital, our providers, and those other centers. That is what will truly, I believe, help our critical access hospitals, these county-run, and that's the other thing that always gets lost in this. We talk about hospitals are closing, clinics are closing. Look and see who they are. They're not county-owned run facilities. They've been either private or they're municipal in Harrington, but there's outlying situations other than simply, they didn't have Medicaid expansion. So that's the thing where if we could just have an honest conversation with everybody yelling at each other or shaking their fists or just have a true conversation moving forward. I hope that happens. I don't see it happen for a while.
What do you think, Troy?
Well, I have to say, the committee room that the hearing was actually held in is right next to my office, because that's the Appropriations Committee room in the morning at 9 a.m. And so the day that they had the hearing, I mean, there was just swarms of people outside of my office. I heard that there was somewhere around 400 proponent testimony that was submitted in regards to Medicaid expansion. But I agree with Ken. It's not going anywhere, obviously not on the House side, because then they decided to table the bill in committee, which essence means it's dead for the rest of the session as far as the House provision. And then, as he mentioned, the minority leader in the Senate, when we go back on the 26th, I think the first matter of business in the Senate is to debate that motion or vote to have it pulled out of committee and and then see if they can get it above the line. I think it takes 26 votes in order to do that. And as he said, I don't think the votes are there. Ken also mentioned what we did in regards on the House, and the Senate did it too. The Senate actually went a little overboard in regards to raising the Medicaid reimbursement rates. We actually had a methodical process when we were looking at it, because those Medicaid rates have not been increased in decades. And so you had a lot of providers and even some hospitals that say, you know what, you're a Medicaid patient, I don't want to take you because you cost us too much. And we don't make any money off of those patients. And so we reevaluated the Medicaid reimbursement rates. And so, to be quite honest, a lot of the hospitals in my district is receiving, now it's a little bit less than if Medicaid expansion would pass, but with the changes in the Medicaid reimbursement rates, they're going to be getting substantially more had we not made those changes. Now, the argument that is going to be made in making changes to the Medicaid reimbursement rate is, well, those are the individuals that are currently on Medicaid. I was like, well, yes, that is true. And it's not addressing what the governor touts, the 150,000 Kansans that are within that window. However, whatever the future lies, we have increased those Medicaid reimbursement rates so those people can get care.
So that's a done deal. That has happened.
That is a done deal. Well, if the governor doesn't line on veto, which I don't think she's going to do that when she goes through the budget. Because the House and the Senate, we increased our position a little bit. The Senate came down from theirs quite a lot. And so we do have the increases to the Medicaid reimbursement rates for both hospitals and physicians in the budget.
And the one thing too is we got to keep in mind, and while I would like to maybe see a little bit more what the House did, we still have to have CMS, the federal government's supposed to sign off on it. Kansans can't, we as a state legislator can't just say, well, it's going to be X amount. It's got to go through a whole process. So that's why I think what the House did was very methodical and something that would stay in compliance. Because the last thing you want is say, well, we're going to promise you the moon and then have to back off because the feds say, no, that's too much, which I know the feds saying it's too much. All they do is just print money. I mean, what is it to them? They don't, but we have to balance our budget. And so hopefully, she doesn't line item veto, but who knows? I mean, maybe she can't because she used all the red ink today.
Well, that's what we're going to go to next. And you can, again, don't forget you're part of this program too. So if you have a question or a comment, please give us a call, 1-800-337-4788. Let's talk about some of those vetoes that the governor went through today and announced, and we, of course, as members of the media, got information about this. A couple of things regarding health care. One for Senate Bill 233, which would have prohibited gender transitioning health care for children, and her feeling is that she says clearly this legislation tramples parental rights, and she was not in favor of it, so she vetoed it. That was something that's been kind of a hot button issue, whether the state should have any say, or is it strictly up to parents and families whether their minor children should undergo.
She vetoed it last year. There was no surprise. She vetoed it this year. We're close, even though we technically have a veto-proof majority. We have a few members in our caucus that would vote with the governor. And so that's where I think you can go through the whole list, Becky, and many of them were passed last year, or it's simply a matter of philosophy. And I think that people love to tout different surveys say this, surveys say that, but to me, I think the governor's out of step on most of these things, and it's obvious. I think that people outside the state of Kansas are influencing her to make that decision. Maybe it's the semi driving the truck with all the red ink. I don't know. That really wasn't a joke either.
Comment?
The only thing that I would say in regards to Senate Bill 233 is, obviously when we had the debate, there was a lot of emotion and in discussion in regards, what is best for the kids, and that's what it comes down to. What is best for the kids? Are they at that age, under the age of 18, are they able mentally to make that decision of changing their gender or starting the process of changing their gender? And I would say not. I mean, we have laws all across the books that say 18 is the age of a consenting adult. We even have laws that are even above that in regards to, now consuming cigarettes or alcohol. That's 21. And so if we're going to keep it at the same age where we actually define somebody as a consenting adult, let's keep it at the age of 18. And I don't think it tramples on parental rights. I think it's just saying, until you're actually defined as a consenting adult, then you can make the decision that you want. But until then, you're considered a minor. And this is a life-changing decision that you're making as a minor. That should be made by an adult. And when you're an adult.
Also vetoed by the governor today, House Bill 2749, which would have required people undergoing abortions to explain or report the reasons why that was happening. That was put into place, or hopefully into place, to talk about why, so that the state could gather information on why these abortions were needed and perhaps better care could be provided in these different instances. But I think, as expected, the governor vetoed that as well, Ken.
Well, right. I mean, and that was a bill that many of us supported, and I think I'm not sure exactly what the number was, but I think it's not. I think we were short probably of a veto proof or a veto override number. It was something that after the value of them both a year or two ago, kind of a reevaluation of what pro-life legislation would be done. I think this is one also that some might see it as an invasion of privacy, but you weren't required. This was if you wanted to volunteer the information, I think, so the state could learn. So I think it's unfortunate, but again, election year, it's easy to be, and some might say this is a divisive issue. Well, I think, again, this is one of these no conversation. It's just, a philosophy, and here we go again.
I misunderstood. I thought that it was written as a requirement. It was not.
No, I believe it's voluntary.
I believe it's voluntary.
Yes.
When we had the discussion and the debate on the House floor, we have physicians who serve in the House, and all of them went and basically, and it's true. I mean, if you change your physician, the first thing that they do is they hand you a packet of all these questions they want to know about your health history. And do you have to answer that? No, you don't have to. Because if you would be required to do that, that'd be an invasion of privacy. This was just asking those questions as to why someone was seeking an abortion. And during the debate, then it got into amendments about, well, let's start asking, when men go to get a vasectomy, why are you wanting to get that? I mean, so it was being expanded. And Ken's exactly right. After the value of them both vote failed a couple years ago, we've been looking at those that are pro-life are looking at different ways of saying, okay, we can't stop abortions, but is there a way to limit them or find out the reasons why somebody was seeking abortion? Now, if the woman doesn't want to answer it, she doesn't have to answer it. I took it as not being a requirement as well.
Right.
But I would say with the governor, with anything regarding abortion, she's going to find that as anti-legislation.
Well, and to that end, another veto today, House Bill 2436, that it would be a crime to coerce someone into undergoing a medical procedure such as the abortion, and she also vetoed that, saying that was concerned about it being kind of vague language and that it might intrude upon, again, private conversations, that sort of thing. Another thing that was vetoed by the governor, and this was by our Hayes Representative Barb Wassinger, who had taken this to the floor, was a case for a Hayes woman who was interested in deregulating the sugaring process, which is a hair removal technique, and Governor Kelly vetoed that, saying that and that it's already regulated by the Kansas Board of Cosmetology, and this young woman was wanting it to not be regulated because it didn't involve chemicals.
Right.
So at this point anyway, it has been vetoed, and I didn't realize it was under those.
It will come back. It will come back. I mean, that's, I think the idea for that is that the hours of training may be a bit excessive. And so I think eventually, many times legislation, you have to be patient and just persevere. You may take many years to get something done. I think this will probably be introduced next year, and it'll go through the process yet again. And we'll probably be right back 2 years from now, just like this.
And you'll have the same answer. Yeah. One other thing that the governor vetoed, which was in the city of Lawrence, that they had decided to prohibit plastic bags for carrying purchased items, and the state said, or the legislature said, you really shouldn't be making those kind of decisions, whereas the governor says, yes, that is a local issue. So that's kind of the state versus local government, it sounds like.
As Ken was just talking about, this has been a piece of legislation that's been circulating year after year after year. Lawrence has actually had this in place for a few years now. And I would say if we want to have uniformity across the state of Kansas, yes, the state does have the authority to say, look, don't limit or just exclude plastic bags. I mean, let all cities allow that, not just having one city not allowing those. Because, I mean, it does cause some problems if you have towners coming in to Lawrence and shopping, and then they're like, oh, well, wait a minute, I got to buy a bag now in order to get the items that I just purchased. So there does need to be uniformity across the state. And actually, I was just watching Kansas Week last night, where they were actually mentioning this on KPTS, and one of the individuals said that he agreed with the state legislature on this particular item. And I would say that he's probably more middle of the road, but he said you can't have a patchwork across the state of Kansas where cities are deciding whether or not to not allow plastic bags.
The governor also today allowed one bill, the Senate Bill 394, to become law without her signature, which I'm going to ask you about how that works. But this is regarding age verification technology for minors and internet, what things that might be considered harmful to them. Again, she felt like the language was kind of vague and it might be ending up infringing on constitutional rights. So there's that issue. But first of all, let's go back to letting it become law without her signature. How does that work exactly? What does that mean?
It's the same thing. I mean, there's a timeline once the bill is passed by both houses, and then the governor can either veto it or let it become law by not doing anything. So rarely this governor does that. She's done a few over her time as governor, but there was some concern with this bill from some folks as far as what exactly does all that mean. But that's the way it works. I mean, it can become law either with a signature or with just letting it sit there, and as time expires, then it becomes law.
I'm going to take a note here that we have another phone caller with about 2 minutes left in the show. We have Steve from McPherson on the phone. Steve, your question or comment of the legislators this evening.
Yes, I had seen that there was some fairly major changes to the civil asset forfeiture law, and wondered if they would like to comment on that.
I'm not exactly. I mean, there was. I think finally what we've been working on for the last several years is finally got done.
And this has been a long process because there's been many cases where there may have been some infringements by law enforcement as far as seizing people's property. Most namely is in regards to Topeka, I believe, where they seized a Corvette because the numbers didn't match, and then it was found out that the numbers of that Corvette matched a crime that was done in, I think, Indiana, and so they seized the Corvette, and the guy that bought it had no idea about it. And So it was actually going through the civil asset forfeiture laws that we had and basically revamping them and making them more modern. So it was a long process because it's a very delicate issue because you're talking about people's property that is being seized by a governmental entity. And so to go through the current civil asset forfeiture laws and reconsider what's current law and what we need to do in the future, as Ken mentioned, it took years in the process. But yes, it's basically to protect the personal property owner.
Well, we're just about out of time for the show tonight. Steve, thank you for your call. We appreciate it. Kathy, thank you for your call from Dodge City. And thank you to our legislators this evening. It's always great to visit with you. Representative Troy Waymaster from Bunker Hill and Representative Ken Rahjes from Agra. And thank you for joining us this evening on the Kansas Legislature. It's been great having you with us again. I'm your host, Becky Kaiser. Good night.